Well, hey there. It's your old pal Keith from wavetables.lol. That's wavetables.lol, home of KRC Mathwaves, my gigantic collection of single-cycle waveforms, wavetables, and even some samples for all sorts of modern synthesizers, including our friend Korg Modwave here. What I wanted to talk about today is one of the earliest sets of wavetables that I created for KRC Mathwaves, which are the Polygonal series waveforms. We're hearing an example of one of those here. And the funny story time. They kind of sound like this, these polygonal waveforms. They're very bell-like. And the way these are created is they are the sum of different harmonics, right? Where the harmonics follow something called the polygonal number series, which is related to, it's like a mathematical theorem that's related to like how many integer number of dots could you fill into some sort of polygon, like a triangle or a square or whatever. We'll get into that a little bit later. And it was my pursuit of these polygonal waveforms, which I had heard from another collection of waveforms called Galbanum, that I've talked about before, that was created more than a decade ago now. And they weren't really fully explored in that collection. I was like, these are super interesting. I'll try to play a little bit as I do my long, talky, rambling video today. And so it was actually the creation of waveforms that were like this that kind of led to the original KRC Mathwaves collection. You know, Mathwaves is about a year old now. Introduced it just about a year ago. And that original collection had like 29,000 single-cycle waveforms in it, created using various mathematical techniques. And then I used various techniques to put those into wavetables. And so that original collection of wavetables was like 36,000. And then in the intervening year, I've continued exploring new wavetable creation techniques, like using machine learning, exploring different kinds of time domain techniques, in addition to the kind of spectral techniques that were used in most of the original collection. And so now it's like more than 160,000 wavetables. So I hope that people who've bought Mathwaves, just $29 at wavetables.lol, sometimes on special. There's also a free sampler with about 1,600 wavetables in it, but you can get 100 times that amount by getting the full version. Anyway, this collection has grown over time, and one thing I wanted to do was go back to the polygonal waveforms and explore them a bit. But then I discovered a funny thing. I'm going to go get another patch here. Where's my phase bell patch? So here is an example patch that uses and wow, you can really hear the bell-like nature of these waveforms, right? So I wanted to go back and explore these waveforms a little bit more, using some of the same techniques I did in my last video, which is called What Can We Learn from the Basic Synthesis Waveforms, where I showed a little bit more about how the Fourier series, can let us construct any sort of waveform. And I played around with the sawtooth and the triangle and the square wave in that one. And we'll get into that a little bit more too. So these waveforms that are from the original collection, this is supposed to be a 5-sided polygon. There's an offset to the harmonics of 3 in this particular wave that we're looking at. Bum, bum, bum. They have this really clear, like bell-like, almost supernaturally bell-like character to them. But when I went back to my original code that I used to generate these waveforms and the variations on them, I discovered something funny. These are not the polygonal waveforms. They actually, I looked at the code and there's two things that like I don't think I intended to do. So one, the function that I used to generate the harmonic numbers, which should be a polygonal series, is similar to the polygonal series, but it's not exactly it. It's kind of wrong. I want to show you. So when I went back to explore these more and I like rewrote my code, not realizing that it was wrong, I was just like, well, we can just like gin up the code to generate our polygonal series, and then we're going to generate some waveforms and wavetables from them. It turns out that the function that I was using was like this. Let's see. Let's get these two guys up here. Blah, blah, blah. Talkie. So this was if we express it mathematically, this is the old function that I was using, and it doesn't actually give us the polygonal numbers. It gives us something similar. This is the actual mathematical expression here for the polygonal numbers. You can see that I goofed it up somehow. I don't know how that error crept in, but I guess I was just so excited to have generated something that had this awesome sound, that I just ran with it and I didn't notice my error. So while there's a huge number of these polygonal type waveforms in KRC Mathwaves, and they're really cool for doing these kind of, dissonant, inharmonic, bell-like tones, they're not actually the polygonal waveforms. You can see that here's a comparison of generating the five-sided polygonal numbers from my old function. And then here's the result from the proper polygonal number function. So you can see that if you look at the spacing of the harmonics, right, and kind of the magnitude of them and how they proceed, this function is quite similar to the polygonal number series, but it's not exactly the same. And then you'll also notice that the amplitudes here are a little different. Now this doesn't necessarily matter, because when I generate a waveform, I then normalize it, so everything goes up to 1. But I did a different falloff here, and we'll talk about that more in these new wavetables. But this is just kind of funny. It's like, well, I guess I made a mistake, but these are cool ass waveforms. So this old function was the old one. Is that the old one? No, that's the proper one. This older function, I guess this is the Crosley series. So it's a peculiar numeric series that creates these incredibly bell-like tones. Now, the proper polygonal number series also creates these bell-like tones, and so I guess I've finally gotten around to actually properly generating the polygonal series waveforms and wavetables. So what I've done is there's a new collection of wavetables inside of KRC Mathwaves. That I'm talking about the full version of KRC Mathwaves. None of these will be found in the free sampler. There's 134 new wavetables that do the polygonal number series right. And the wavetables themselves, I have done a bunch of different variations on that we'll talk about that I think are useful for a lot of creative synthesis, and not necessarily just bells. We could do pad-like things with these as well. I love these kind of glassy textures that you get from wavetables like this. And a lot of these numerical series waveforms, I've done this type of thing for many other things, not just that wrong polygonal function and not just this right polygonal number function, but also like the power of 2 series. the Fibonacci series, which we'll look at a little bit later in this video because I've redone some of those wavetables. Things called the Catalan series, the Perrin numbers, Tetrahedral numbers, which is interesting. That's more like a 3D volume. It's the same idea as the polygonal numbers, but how many balls could fill a pyramid kind of thing. I know that's a weird idea, but they also have this kind of sound. So when you have these numerical series that have like gaps in them, right, where there are many harmonics that are zero, so there's no amplitude to like the sine wave that's composing the wave at these various points. It gives these kind of waveforms have a unique character in that they're often reminiscent of bells, not always. The polygonal ones and the Crosley series of waveforms have a very bell-like character, but also they respond strangely to things like stretch. So you've got all these modifiers in Modwave, and you have similar like bend in Serum and things like that can modify a waveform. You'll hear what happens if we use stretch, which is sort of like a PWM effect. If we stretch this waveform, it loses that bell-like property. Let's turn down oscillator 2. You'll see that when the waveform is unstretched, it sounds like this supernatural bell sound, but then if we stretch it, we immediately ruin that property. It's weird, right? And it becomes much more, it sort of takes on, elements of a sawtooth wave. But right here, at the center point, it has that beautiful bell-like timbre. So this is true of kind of all of these numeric series waveforms. It's an interesting property. I'm going to take a short break and then we'll be back and we'll talk more about this stuff. Now, another thing that I hadn't mentioned yet about my original polygonal waveforms. We'll go grab another one of those again. Let's do 5 sides, offset 0 maybe? Where's offset 0? 5 sides. My eyes are a little buggy today, gotta tell you. When I looked at the code, another kind of strange thing that I had done is I intended to generate these waveforms and wavetables using a harmonic falloff of 1 over n. And I talked about that in my previous video about the basic synthesis waveforms, that at least with the sawtooth and the square wave, like a falloff of 1 over n is the magic number to get those waveforms. And if we change the exponent on n, like we do a more, we decrease the exponent or we increase it, we get some different waveforms that are a little less useful. Like that's partly how we get the triangle wave. We can take the square wave function, which is just all the odd harmonics, and we do a harmonic falloff of 1 over n squared instead of 1 over n. We can get the triangle wave and waveforms that sound exactly like the triangle wave. And then if we apply that same technique to the sawtooth wave, we get kind of a filtered sounding sawtooth wave. So back to these original polygonal waveforms, it looks like instead of a 1 over n falloff, I actually had like an exponential curve doing the falloff. So they're different in that way as well. They're not exactly what I intended, but they sound beautiful. So, I guess sometimes mistakes lead to great discoveries, right? And I continue to be haunted by these waveforms and also the properly constructed polygonal waveforms. But the falloff was something that was different. Now, one thing that I did do right with all of these waveforms is I intentionally created them with different numbers of harmonics, so that like in this case, I think this is probably like up to 18 harmonics. So we're just taking the first 18 polygonal numbers and then nothing after that. And that kind of enhances this bell-like nature. We'll see in the, let's do it right now. We'll see in the proper polygonal waveforms that, let's see, adjust this back to the center point. That's the 1 over n. I have, go up an octave. That these waveforms have been computed out to 2048 harmonics, and that's not actually the 2048th harmonic itself, but actually the 2048th polygonal number that comes from the polygonal series function. And so these are very highly detailed. You know, most of those super high harmonics don't really contribute anything, but since we're summing like, you know, 2048 sine waves, they do have an impact. So I guess you could say that these are some of the highest resolution waveforms that I've ever created. And so there's a lot of different things to talk about with these. Why don't I just, let's play some examples and just kind of walk through what I did with these new wavetables. Again, these are all in KRC Mathwaves, and there's about 134 of these for all the formats. So there's wave format for Searman Vital. You've got an MW bundle for your Modwave or Modwave native, which we're running here. There's .wt format for Bitwig and Surge, and then also Phase Plant, which is recently introduced. So there's a Phase Plant version of these, and then also Eurorack versions of the Wave Edit 16-bit format. So all the different formats, right? So one thing that's kind of natural to do with these waveforms is to use them in bell-like patches, right? So this is a very simple bell-like patch, right, where we've got our amplitude, you know, long release, right? If we really wanted to bell, I guess we'd put our sustain down to 0. And then, you know, we can do variations on that, like mix in another waveform. So here we've got 2 of these polygonal wavetables going. And the combination of these makes for these kind of mysterious bell-like tones. So there's a whole bunch of variations on these. And so what I've done is first, for each polygonal number from 3, or each polygon, I guess you'd say, from the 3-sided polygon, our friend the triangle, up to an 18-sided polygon. I don't really know what the 18-sided polygon would be called in the Greek, but it's an n-gon that has 18 sides. We generate them in a wavetable that's like this, where at the center point, we've got the waveform computed. Let's just turn down oscillator 2 again. We've got the waveform converted with a computed with a harmonic falloff of 1 over n. But over the course of the wavetable, that exponent on n changes. So at the very bottom of the wavetable, the start of it, we're using a harmonic falloff of 1 over n to the 0.3. And you see that just like in my last video about this topic, they get kind of nasal, right? And then we go out to an exponent of 3. So there's a harmonic fall off at the last position where the harmonics fall off with a 1 over n to the 3rd relationship. And this becomes almost a sine wave. So through a lot of playing around, I found that this was a very pleasing kind of effect. So we've basically got like a filtered version of this polygonal wave, and then it goes to we might call this the true version, the 1 over n version. And then as the exponent decreases, these actually get a little more energy to them, and they're brighter. And that's actually useful. And then they go full on nasal. This is different from what happens with the sawtooth and the square. Let's just demo that real quick, because inside here, and when you import these into, say, Modwave, you'll find a collection of these wavetables that's called KRC Poly Redux. So we revisited the polygonal waveforms, right? So I call it Poly Redux. And in addition to the variations on the polygonal waves, there's also the same type of sawtooth and square waves that I talked about in my What Can We Learn from the Basic Synthesizer Waveforms video. So here's a sawtooth. Now at the middle position here, this is like the true sawtooth wave. It's like all harmonics in a one over n harmonic fall off. And then as we reduce it, it gets really nasal. And then when we get out to the 0.3, it's very, very thin. And then somewhere around here, there's the 1 over n squared relationship. Which is, you know, it sounds like a filtered sawtooth, and then it goes almost to a sine. But going back to the polygonal waveforms, you'll note that these fall-offs that are a smaller exponent, they're actually really useful because we get a nice attack. We can modulate, right, our wavetable position to get to a brighter region of the wavetable, and then just let it fall back off. So that's a cool thing that you can do with these types of wavetables. Now, there are a whole bunch of different variations, and I'm sorry I keep referring to this previous video of mine, but it's useful to watch it because I talk a little bit more about, you know, how these wavetables are created. Now, as I showed in that previous video, we can, if we change the phase relationships of different harmonics, we can create two wavetables or two waveforms that will cancel each other out. So one thing that I did with these, you'll see that like here we've got the 5-sided polygon. And so if we want the true, it's the standard, the regular 5-sided polygonal waveforms, they are here in this one called Polygon_sides05_FO. The FO is for fall off. You know, we're doing this changing of the way the harmonics fall off. And then I did versions where we invert the phase of different harmonics. So this version, Polygon SO5 even FO, means that the even numbered harmonics, so 2, 4, 6, 8, etc., have their phase rotated by 180 degrees. And then similarly, we have a version Polygon sides 05 odd FO, where all of the odd harmonics, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, have been phase rotated. And what this does is if we have Polygon 05 even in one oscillator, and then we mix it with Polygon sides 05 odd, these two waveforms will cancel out. And this patch, I'm hitting my keys here. I'll prove it to you. So you can see on my keyboard, I'm making some chords, but this makes no sound because these waveforms are like mirror images of each other, right? And so the sounds cancel. Now, if we change one of these waveforms at all, like say by adjusting its tuning, so we'll like tune oscillator 2 here up by 5 cents, all of a sudden this makes a sound. And if I further adjusted the tuning, say go down 5 cents here, did I make this one up? Yeah, up and down. That's an interesting, you could use that as a flute, right? It's almost like a chiffy flute sound. But the reason that I did this, well, one reason that I did this, is that it's fun to, I showed this example in my previous video. Well, we'll just go grab this patch, that you can do pulse width modulation if you have two waveforms like this. So if you have like this, if you have the sawtooth wave, right, and you've got one that's a downward going sawtooth wave and one that's an upward going sawtooth wave, they will cancel in that funny way. But also, if you arrange them like this, and then you modulate the tuning of one of these slightly, it creates a PWM effect. So here's what we'll do. We'll turn off this modulation on tune. And so here's the standard sawtooth wave combined with the ramp sawtooth wave. And you can hear that the sound here is actually the square wave. So these sum in such a way that all of the even harmonics cancel. And so we've got the square wave. And if we modulate our tuning on one of them just by a small amount, what happens is we actually get the exact same waveform that's produced when we do pulse width modulation on a square wave. I talked about that more, and there'll be a link in the description to the article that explores this originally. It's Gordon Reed from Sound on Sound from many years ago. So this is a cool way to do PWM. And so I was like, we could do that same thing with the polygonal waveforms, right? So here we've got these two guys canceling. What happens if I take the tune parameter on one of them and then modulate it with an LFO? So I'm using my pitch LFO here, which is set to like a square wave. So this is like there's some waveform that you could take and do pulse width modulation on it, and it would produce this sound. Let's change our, there we go. It's a very pleasing type of chorusing. And we could increase this if we wanted to. It gets a little really wobbly. Or you could increase the frequency with which we modulate that tuning. Interesting stuff, right? Now, another reason that I did this sort of thing is that by inverting the phase, like rotating the phase by 180 degrees of different types of partials, our waveforms will cancel in different ways, and it just kind of gives us, sort of new sound design possibilities to explore. So let's see what we're doing here. So here we've got the four-sided polygonal numbers, where I've rotated all the odd frequencies. In oscillator 2, we've got five-sided polygonal numbers, where we've rotated every even harmonic. And, we could further adjust our phase to get different kinds of cancellations. Let's take that off of there. You can see that you can hear we're now kind of boosting the fundamental more. We've got more bass in the sound. And then at some points it gets canceled more. And so there's lots of different variations on these. So for every polygon, from 3 sides up to 18 sides, there are these different versions. We'll just walk through them real quick. So these underscore alt ones, we're alternating every single harmonic that's in the waveform. We are inverting it. So, let's look at how the polygonal numbers go. So like in a 5-sided polygon, the 5-sided polygonal number series, it's like 1, 5, 12, 22, 35, etc., etc. And these numbers just keep increasing. It's like every other harmonic that's in there we've rotated. So we've rotated harmonic 5, harmonic 22, harmonic 51, etc. Now the mathematics behind this don't really matter much, but these can give you different sounds. So we've also done a version here where we've EOE, where we've phase rotated every other even harmonic, every other odd harmonic, and then all the even harmonics, okay? And then this is the original one. And then we've got a version where we rotate all the odd harmonics. And then let's see. yeah, that's it. Those are all the variations, right? So all these 5 different variations. So there's a lot of interesting stuff to play with there. It's fun to try different things with these in different relationships. Let's see here. So that's an explanation of what those different types mean. Let's look at some other patches. So in addition to all of these different variations on the individual waveforms, they do go up to like 18 sides. And let's listen to what happens there, I guess. Let's go up to like 17 here. You'll see this waveform looks quite a bit different. It has a lot more high frequency content in it. Where are we? We're in oscillator 2. So that's what 17 sounds like. And then if we go all the way up to 18, they get a lot more like, I guess you'd say they sort of sound like there's a sine wave with just, a very high frequency couple of sine waves superimposed on it. So that's about, the limit of their usefulness. And then the lower numbers, like sides of 3. Let's see, it's good, like sides of 3. We'll take the alternate version of it. They're more rich, right? They're bell-like, but they're more rich. So that's the difference in these different numbers. There are other versions of these wavetables that are called the sides variations that are used in this patch. Maybe we'll go to play mode so we can see both of these waveforms at once. And so what these wavetables are a collection of all of the different polygonal numbers, in this case going from the 3-sided n-gon to the 10-sided n-gon, and they're arranged in a wavetable. So you've got access to all of the different polygonal sides, up to like 10, which I think is, kind of the limit of their usefulness. So if I turn off my crossfade width, we'll turn down this oscillator 2. There's the 3-sided polygon with a exponent of 0.7. Let's go to the one that has the exponent of 1. So this would be like the standard 3-sided polygonal waveform. And then as we move up the table, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And they're, they can be fun to sweep. And if we put our crossfade width back up, we'll get a smooth morph between them. Which is kind of interesting. Now, another thing that I realized is that there's a little bit of it, it's funny the way the harmonics interact in this. And so I thought it would be interesting to, instead of just doing all the side numbers, let's separate the even and the odd ones. So you've got p-gon sides 3 to 10 with an exponent of 1. That means a harmonic fall off of 1 over n to the first. There's just 1 over n. We've got brighter versions, right? An exponent of 0.7, which gives us that more attacky sound. And then a slightly rolled off one, an exponent of 1.3. You can see what that looks like. It has less sharpy things in it, right? And we have to go up a couple octaves to hear it well. So that's as if these waveforms had already been filtered a little bit. And then also out to an exponent of 2, which will be very soft sounding. And these might be interesting. These exponent 2 ones might be useful for FM, right? As an alternative to, say, using a sine wave. So they're potentially very interesting. Okay, so those are all the polygons from 3 to 10. And then, like I say, I did versions where it's just the even ones. So this goes like 4. What is it? It'd be 4. Oops, turn that off. Turn that modulation off. So these would be like 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Oh, thanks, GeForce. You have a driver for me? Nice. Okay. And I kind of feel like, I have no mathematical proof of this, but I feel like these morphs with like the even polygons sound a little sweeter together, right? Than just all of them. So that's an interesting type of wavetable. And then there's the odd version. So there's p-gon sides odd. Where's p-gon sides odd? P-gon sides odd exponent 1. And the odd ones, so the odd polygons like do have a different sound than the even ones, don't they? Now, something that's interesting. Here's a fun math thing, and here's another example of honoring my error as a hidden intention. When I wrote the code to do these even and odd ones, I was thinking in my head, oh, okay, yeah, the odds are like 3, 5, 7, 9, right? And then the evens are like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And I was like, not thinking about the fact that like, wait a minute, there's not a two-sided polygon, is there? So I did a version of these. Let's look at the evens. This only happens in the evens, where I accidentally started it at the polygon with sides 2 and like went up to 10 or something like that. And it turns out that that doesn't cause an error, but listen to this. What's that last waveform here? What's the polygonal sided waveform with sides 2? It's the sawtooth wave. Maybe rotate the phase so you can see it. So I guess this is more proof that there is something special about the polygonal waveforms, especially because the two-sided polygon creates the sawtooth wave. Pretty wild. Anyway, so I left those in here because this might be useful. You know, you could like modulate the wavetable position just a little bit here. Nifty. Okay, so those are the sides variations. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting to do if you have wave state, or sorry, if you have Modwave. Modwave has this interesting wavetable AB mode where you can actually morph between two wavetables. So not only can you like morph position within a wavetable, but you can morph it with some other wavetable. And so what I've done here is I've made these p-gon sides wavetables with different exponents. So here's the bright one, right? So it's the exponent of 0.7. That has a brighter sound. And that's in the A position. And then in the B position, I've got the same wavetable, but it's the, what is this one? We need to go out to play mode to see it. So this is the p-gon sides 3 to 10 exponent 1, with only 3 harmonics. So in addition to the different roll-offs that we saw before, I also did versions of these wavetables where we're only using like the first 3 polygonal numbers. And so this is another kind of form of filtering that we could do on these waveforms. And so if we change our AB blend here, we go from this very sharp version of the polygonal waveform to this very filtered sounding version of the polygonal waveform. And you'll see we're not actually using our filter here to get this effect. We're just morphing between this higher energy wavetable and this lower energy wavetable. So that's kind of a fun thing that you can do. Those are the reduced harmonic versions. Let's see here. What other little things do we want to explore? I'm using a similar idea here in this patch. So this uses the sides versions that I'm then mixing here with a sawtooth wave. And Yeah, actually the same oscillator in number 2, where I've got a saw, the alternating phase version of the sawtooth, and then in oscillator 2, I've got the true sawtooth wave. And that sounds like this. So we just kind of, we slowly morph up into those polygonal shapes, and then we go back to a filtery sawtooth wave. And I've put some velocity modulation on here so that that envelope that controls that change responds to velocity. So let's see, which one is that? So the filter envelope is responding to velocity, and it's also modulating the transition between the A and B wavetables. And so if I play very lightly, we've got this slow transition, and then if I whack these keys really hard, I get this a bell-like attack. So that's kind of a fun thing that you can do with these types of wavetables. So again, as with everything in KRC Mathwaves, there's a lot to explore here. I'm not sure if I covered everything I wanted to talk about with these strange waveforms and wavetables, but I think you get the basic idea. Let's go back to, well, what's this guy? This is using the same idea to kind of pulse our way from a sawtooth to that. Now there are also square wave versions of these. So we looked at the saws. I showed how you could cancel out 2 sawtooth waves and then detune them to get the PWM effect. Whoops, where's my KRC Poly Redux wavetables? There's a couple other things in here. Let's see. So here's all the variations of saws. There's variations on the square wave too. Let's just take a look at those really quick. So here's the basic square wave. What are we in here? 2. Let's turn up oscillator 2. So this is, I showed this in my what can we learn from the basic waves video. This is what happens when we change the fall off on the square wave. And then there's other versions where I've rotated the harmonics. Now the square wave will not respond a whole lot to these kinds of changes because it only has the odd harmonics, right? But here's what happens if we alternate all the harmonics. This is the equation that actually gives us the triangle wave somewhere out here, or at least a variation on the triangle wave. Here's changing every other even harmonic. Now there are no even harmonics in the square wave, so this is going to be the same wavetable as the original one. But I like this sound, right? This is kind of a cool... Let's turn our filter off. Even without the filter, it's a very interesting effect as we traverse the wavetable. And of course, at the 50% point, we've got the true square wave. So, what we could do, right, is we could go down here, we could modulate up. Oops, what's going on with this envelope? Why am I confused? I don't know why that's not modulating. Maybe we should go the other way. I don't know what's wrong with this patch. What did I do? I have some weird modulation going on. There we go. Just faffing around, aren't I? So yeah, it's like a square wave wavetable where there's a built-in, built-in filtering effect, essentially. And then there's versions that create triangular types of waves. And these could be interesting in combination with other waveforms, right? I guess there was another thing I wanted to show. Since I took the polygonal waveforms and one, computed them correctly, and then two, computed them in a very high resolution fashion out to 2048 harmonics, I thought it might be interesting to look at another numerical series. So there's one other numerical series you'll find in here, which is the Fibonacci series. Let me go back to this patch. That's just a one oscillator patch. And let's put, instead of a polygonal waveform, let's put the Fibonacci series wavetable in here. Poly Redux. Let's see, where's the Fibonacci ones? So here's the Fibonacci series. Now the Fibonacci series, maybe I'll throw up the equation, maybe, it's found like everywhere in nature, and it's kind of related to, like seashells and the golden ratio and all this kind of stuff. And so you might think that using the Fibonacci numbers to create the waveforms might be interesting, and it is. It creates a very strange kind of waveform. It's like the polygonal number waveforms, but instead of having these very special sort of sinusoidal shapes, it takes on a little bit of a sawtooth character. You can see there's these kind of sawtooth waves inside it. And so it sounds bell-like because it does have these very high harmonics. The Fibonacci numbers go high very, very quickly. But it doesn't sound magical to me like the polygonal ones do. And let's see what happens if we stretch it. It does sound kind of interesting to stretch it. It's kind of a weird growl that happens there. But I don't know. It's kind of strange. But that's in here. And in the original KRC Mathwaves collection, there was a Fibonacci series. But just like with the wrong polygonal numbers, I limited the number of harmonics, like 18 and 6 and stuff like that. So anyway, there's variations on the Fibonacci series here if you want to play around with that. And like you could just pick one of these ones that has weird phase rotations in it, right? Combine it with something else. And, get, I don't know, maybe interesting stuff. Keep in mind, right, that all these phase cancellation kind of things that can happen with these waveforms, you can manually adjust the phases of your waveforms. And also, you can vary the amplitude, right? So you'll get, if you vary the amplitude of one of the waveforms, you get interesting effects because you'll get different cancellations and different boosts, right? Interesting stuff, I guess. I guess that's it for today. That's the Polygonal Numbers Redux. I may not be done with this video. Maybe I have something else to say that I'll find in editing. But anyway, go get KRC Mathwaves at wavetables.lol. All these new wavetables are in the full version of KRC Mathwaves. But you can also go get the free sampler, which gives you 1,600 wavetables of varying types. That gives you just a small peek into the full collection. And have fun, go synthesize, play around with phase relationships, and have a great day.